Hello, everyone. My name is Abhay Tandon, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here and talk to you all about innovation models for GCC. But before I talk to you about that, let me give you a little bit of a perspective about why am I here, what have I done in the past, so that I can speak to you a little bit more specifically about why these innovation models are something that I've seen personally up front and close. I've executed a bunch of these models across multiple GCCs. So I've worked for multiple GCCs like Target, Anheuser-Busch InBev, and Lowe's. I've also worked for an Indian conglomerate called as TVS Group, which is the third largest two-wheeler manufacturer globally. In the past, and even now, I've been associated with a lot of industry bodies like Atal Incubation Mission, Forbes Technology Council, NASCOM, and TIE. And I've actually invested in about 35 odd startups and been ranked amongst the top innovation leaders in the country. So, having worked with so many different organizations over the year, I've developed a philosophy towards innovation and how value creation can happen. More often than not, I believe in a very simple perspective over here from innovation standpoint, which is objects in the future may be closer than they appear, right? I personally feel that because more often than not, a lot of times we get this perspective from various business leaders saying that this is way out in the future, and it's not really the case. AI being an example, a lot of times we perceive things to be really out there, but then the volatility in the technology space is very, very high, and that's where a lot of value generation can happen a lot faster than sometimes or more often than not people perceive as well. So going by this mantra, I've decided to talk to you today about a little bit about innovation models in GCCs. Again, when I talk to you about innovation models in GCCs, let me also give you a perspective about what the definition of innovation is for most GCCs. Now, again, when GCCs get set up, they are not necessarily at a place where they are able to drive innovation from day one, right? So you talk about a maturity curve, and as the GCC goes through the maturity curve, they gradually get into a place where they're able to drive a lot of innovation, like drive a lot of transformation as well. Now, the typical phase one of the GCC maturity curve is experimentation, where they just set up, right? So they're just trying to set up GCC as an experiment. They're trying to see if things are working out or not. Then you talk about optimization, where gradually you're able to start setting up or mirroring some of those processes, product creation, and so on and so forth, different kind of capabilities at the GCC level. The third is scale up, when you're actually growing a lot stronger, a lot faster. You're improvising on every aspect that you've taken on in GCCs. And the fourth phase is innovation transformation. Now, in my thinking, while does make sense that when the maturity of a GCC is at a particular level, that's when they need to get into innovation and transformation. Having said that, more often than not, I've seen GCCs that have succeeded in India or are succeeding or doing extremely well are the ones who are keeping innovation as a backbone right from day one. They're not waiting to be at a particular stage or phase in their maturity curve to then eventually think about innovation. They start off with innovation as a thought process, as a fundamental, as a value system that is coherent with how they go about building capabilities at the GCC level, and that is how more value is delivered to the parent organizations as well. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the different kind of models of innovation that I have particularly seen over the years. So back in 2013, one of the first few GCCs that were present in India, they started developing a particular model, and in 2012, 2013, three of them actually came up with an accelerator model, right? These are the first three GCCs or enterprises in India to start thinking about startup accelerator model. uh, I think the first one was Microsoft or SAP. The first and second were Microsoft and SAP, and then immediately followed by that was Target. All of them in 2013. And Startup Accelerator as a model did continue for a period of time, whereby you bring in startups to work with you, and that helps you accelerate the growth. But as you can see from here, there are different kind of sources of innovation, right? Typically, you think about big tech firm partnerships, for example, partnering with an OpenAI or an Anthropic, right, or a Microsoft or a Google. These are big tech firm partnerships. Then you have industry ecosystems. For example, one of the largest industry ecosystem in the country is called NASCOM, and more often than not, most of the GCCs also end up partnering with industry ecosystems like NASCOM. The third would be cross-industry strategic alliances. So that would be another very interesting form of driving innovation. Fourth is academic research, something that is very R&D driven. more often than not, most GCCs get into academic driven research fairly late into their maturity curve. You have startups, then you have college projects as well, and then you have consultants or gig SMEs, which are loosely held innovators, and you bring them together to create value for yourself. Now, when I look at innovation, I look at value creation. Uh, there's a very distinct and big difference in how value creation happens versus how value creation is perceived. More often than not, people think that innovation is something radically different, but it's not. Innovation could also be incremental and disruptive at the same time, right? So it's very important that we time that innovation to milestones that are leading to impact creation at regular intervals in time for both the GCC as well as the parent company. Uh, Anything that is cheaper, faster, better, and more scalable than the existing solutions in my head also qualifies as a very, very strong innovation. Right? It doesn't have to be radically different from what you're currently at. Now, when I talk about startups as one of the key models that I've seen, which has worked out for GCCs, I look at them as efforts or inflows versus outflows, right? Or outcomes. Now, outcomes is something that I call in the form of values, which is direct value, something that will lead into any kind of top line, bottom line, or financial impact, or an NPS impact, or anything of or new product development and so on and so forth, which eventually will lead to a top line impact as well, right? The second is indirect value. So in many cases, what happens is that when you think about indirect value, it's basically how enterprises are then be able to learn from some of these partnerships and then develop their own solutions in-house, which makes sense from a long-term standpoint or even mid-term standpoint, considering that the cost efficiencies are much higher there. And even from a security standpoint and compliance standpoint, it would make a lot more sense to strategically integrate everything in-house and build it in-house from a mid and long-term standpoint. And third is brand value. Brand value is very, very important from a perspective of potentially hiring interesting, workforce in a country like India. So that's where a lot of times these partnerships also result in creating a stronger brand value towards innovation initiatives of those GCCs. Now, and these are all outcomes, but what are the different effort levels that go into building this out? You talk about effort in terms of effort of creating this kind of a program. Then you talk about the cost that goes in, and the third is the speed at which you can operate using these programs. So keeping these things in mind, of course, when you talk about working with startups, there are again so many different models. You have startup programs with tech companies, acquisitions, investments, acqui-hires, open innovation, startup accelerators, POCs only, and research startups. Now, all of them have different kind of connotations in terms of value adds as well as the efforts that are going into it. For example, obviously, if you think about an acquisition, it will have a strong direct, indirect, and brand value impact. But at the same time, the cost associated with that is very high, both for acquisition and acquire. The effort is also very, very high because you have to integrate that product or that solution or that team into your organization, and that takes a lot of time and effort as well, right? But the speed is relatively very, very slow. It takes a lot of time. Now, keeping all these different kind of models in mind, two models that I think have worked out very, very well for most GCCs in this country are either open innovation and startup accelerator. Typically, the lower hanging fruit is a startup accelerator, whereby you identify a series of problem statements, convert them into scientifically defined use cases, and look at the market for interesting solutions which are being developed by startups. Now, that costs you very less. It's also a very agile way to test out your solutions, test out if those integrations work out at a very, very low cost. So you fail fast and learn fast, right? But sometimes you don't even fail, you actually succeed because those solutions make a lot of sense and are plugging in a particular and important pertinent gap for your company. And I've seen a lot of those success stories as well in the form of a startup accelerator. Typically, the cost is also not significantly high, it's fairly low. Effort is also fairly low. Speed is a lot faster, and the outcomes, both from a direct value as well as brand value, is higher. Indirect value is slightly lower because some of these startups would be very, very cognizant of their IP as well, and they're going to be masking that as well in some extent, to some extent as well. On the other hand, open innovation is a much more holistic approach towards partnerships with startups, and has a lot more brand direct and indirect value creation. Yes, it takes a little bit more time and a little bit more effort sometimes too. But then, from a long run standpoint, open innovation would mean that you're not just talking about uh, plugging in a particular gap, you're talking about actually co-building solutions with some of these startups, which leads to a stronger IP creation and a potential pipeline that can be deployed globally for your organization. So these are different ways in which, more often than not, I've seen GCCs work with GCCs that are being set up in India tap into the innovation potential of the country. And since I've worked with a bunch of them, and I still consult a few of them as well, I can guarantee in a guaranteed way say that it's very very pertinent to tap into the innovation potential, and GCCs can make a big and huge difference. We have seen some of these partnerships create $100 million kind of impact as well for some of the GCCs, right? So there are enough and more success stories. But at this point of time, I'll stop here. And in case you have any questions, feel free to drop in the same in the comments, and I'll be happy to answer those.